Okay, good evening. In the first place, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us and accompany the doctoral candidate, Fabián Cárdenas, as he plays in his latest paper entitled Seeking a Horizontal and Source of Customary International Law. For this topic, it's very important to share progress with the academic community and enrich from it. There is no doubt that Cárdenas' area of investigation or research has become one of the great topics of today's world. So I'm glad that we come with Professor Jan Fabián, who I introduced to the public as a special guest of our faculty and with whom I have signed early today an agreement of academic cooperation on behalf of the University of Manchester. Professor Jan is currently known as a leading researcher in public international law and is director of Manchester International Law Center. Also, I want to introduce Professor René, director of the International Law Department at the University of Los Andes, and Professor Juana Inés Acosta López, director of Law Program at the University de La Sabana, and current president of Colombian Academy of International Law. René will have Professor Jan Fabián with comments on the exposition, and Juana Acosta plays as moderator. Please don't hesitate intervening at any time for your questions or contributions. That's the idea here. At closer, we have invited you all to take some coffee with us. Let's welcome Fabián.
Thank you. So should I go to the stand or what?
Yeah, please take a stand.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. It is a pleasure for me to be here at this university, my own university, and I am very honored by the presence of these honorable guests. Firstly, Professor Jan Fabián, my very own co-supervisor. I should also recognize I have a co-supervision with Professor Rafael Prieto San Juan, who may be probably watching the video right now, so I send him regards. Thank you also to René, who took the time to come here, and to Juana. And they are also very distinguished colleagues of the Colombian Academy of International Law. So thank you so much. This is the topic of my presentation, which I called Seeking for a Recipe and a Source of Customary International Law, and question remarks. So at the beginning, I just want to contextualize what I am currently doing in my PhD research, because that is the idea of the whole event, and to tell you what I am doing right now and what is the purpose of my thesis, in order to see how this comes and play a theoretical role. And at some point, before I was working on international environmental law, I wrote a textbook on that field. And after doing that, I realized that the sources of this particular field were not concrete and were not very objective. So then I realized that there were also some instability in the theory of the sources. At some point, I decided to focus on the idea of customary international law as the main source according to which international environmental law is supposed to be emerged and is supposed to be developed. So that's how I came to this particular topic. I previously distributed to the audience an article which I just published in the Colombian Yearbook of International Law, which is called is Opinio Juris, like the only ingredient of the recipe of customary international law. I should also thank my student Oscar Casales, who is here, who helped me with this article. And in that particular article, the one that you have, I basically set the generalities of the discussion regarding the possibility of having an actual rule or secondary rule, if we use hard terms, or anything else apart from a rule, whatever it is, to regulate customary international law. So in this particular article that I distributed before, I basically challenged the idea that the definition given by the ICJ in Article 38 is the definition of customary international law, and that it is a static definition, I conversely think that it is rather a dynamic definition which has been evolved through the practice of the international community. However, this was just like the introduction of my research project, and then I had the possibility to finalize chapter 2 of my own thesis, so I distributed chapter 2 to my co-supervisors, both Professor Prieto, who is in Oxford right now, D'Apremont, and now my distinguished reader, René, as well, you know. So I'm gonna tell you how this initial thinking regarding the possibility of having a rule governing customary international law has evolved. And that's when I come to my presentation. So you will see some just funny slides in my presentation, because I just don't need to bore you with this theoretical discussion. So the first part is where the whole discussion started. Is customary international law an inert thing, I mean like a stone, or is it a living creature? It is something that it is supposed to be evolved according to the practice of international community. And then you have also, I hope you already had the opportunity to read the cartoon. So next. The first part of this document, in which I am developing my own thesis, I wonder whether we can know what is in fact customary international law. So at the first part of my document, I attempt to find out whether there is a concept or a definition of customary international law. Here, honoring my Belgian co-supervisor, Jean D'Apremont, I decided to put Tintin or Tintin in French, just asking a question. You know, he's a detective, so this is kind of my endeavor to carry out a detective theoretical police of international law. Next, please. Again, here we have Tintin in honor of Professor D'Apremont. And I, at some point of my document, I concluded that there is nothing but epistemological uncertainty regarding the theory of customary international law. How did I reach to this particular conclusion? I basically reviewed the different theories of customary international law, and I found out that there was not the perfect or the correct definition of customary international law, but there was rather different versions and attempt to theorize customary international law. And all the definitions, they depended on the particular theory that the observer or the writer decided to take. And here I have this slide, very interesting. It's called La Danse Macabre. You know, Professor D'Apremont has a very interesting blog in the European Journal of International Law, which is where he makes a reference of customary international law as a dance floor. And of course, I put him in the category of the cynics of customary international law, meaning the scholars who think that customary international law is just an instrument, you know, for the epistemic community to carry out their own agendas. So he called that customary international law was indeed just a dance floor. That's the correct term that he used. So a dance floor where all the international lawyers are participating in a dancing party, go there and do their moves according to their own desires. So that's why I put this very interesting slide. Can we go next? Then here I have Homer preparing some Kellogg's with milk, and this slide, it aims to show one of the outcomes of part A of my document, where I concluded that in fact there were just different versions and different manners to use ingredients in order to get customary international law. Of course, I am not going to the whole evidentiary thing, because this document is 84 pages. I am just trying to set the generalities. Next, please. And I will just very quickly show you which are the main categories I made up in order to differentiate the different attempts to theorize customary international law. The first one, which is the most popular one, of course, is the one written in in Article 38 of the ICJ statute, where customary international law is defined as an evidence of a practice accepted as law. So this is the reference definition, and that's why you have the building where the ICJ operates. Next, the other category which I made up is the fixed reference definition. There are lots of scholars who try to use the same definition made by the ICJ, but putting things right. Here we have also a little cartoon. You know this saying that putting the cart before the horse, and that's what this trend criticized about the reference definition, because customary international law is not the evidence of practice accepted as law, but is the other way around. Practice accepted as law is the evidence of customary international law. So this was the second attempt. The third one, can we go to the next, which I call the unbelievers definition. And this dichotomy between unbelievers and believers has a reference to the two main ingredients of traditional customary international law concept, which is supposed to have both opinion juris and state practice. So the unbelievers are those like Anthony Tomato who rely more on the objective element of customary international law, that meaning of course just state practice. I mean, customary international law is just what I see. If I can't see it, it just doesn't exist, but this is also version. The next one, then of course we have the believers definition, and we have leopard. These categories were made up by myself, of course, in order to describe some categories. We have people like Leopard and a few naturalist thinkers who believe that in fact customary international law is made by a combination of both, you know, the objective gray side of customary international law and the subjective element of opinion juris. Next. Then I have other categories. Dreamers is where I put people who believe that customary law is made exclusively of opinion juris, you know, from the international community. Then I will move faster. There are attempts to equate, you know, the theory of customary international law with domestic custom. Next. We also have people who using heart as a foundation believe that customary international law is not a final product, but is a process. You know, something you make throughout a process. And finally, the last one, I also have the cynics definitions, where I of course put my own supervisor. And here I have a fun cartoon. I hope you can read it. And this kind of scholars believe that customary international law is just a tool for power, you know, a tool to implement personal political agendas. So here we find, of course, people like Michael Reisman from the New Haven School and John Clavers, and of course we have a few comments also from my supervisor. Then, of course, this is how I come to the idea that there is not a concept, but there are just argumentative alternatives. And this is the first time I use the word arguments, because I am, at this point, I was thinking that customary international law was rather an argumentative, you know, tool for doing something. It wasn't something objective or made by rules, but it was rather just an argument. And then I have the guy from Hell's Kitchen saying, okay, which ingredients I will use today? Just saying that. But if my whole research would have ended here, of course I would have destroyed customary international law. I mean, at least attempt to destroy customary international law. I would say customary international law is rubbish, there is nothing, and let's move to another field. But I didn't stop here, and then I came to part B of my document. Could you move further? Where I realized that despite of the different attempts and to conceptualize customary international law, even all the contradictory theories of customary international law, they shared some values. And that's when I realized that even though there were not particular rules, specific rules, you know, very concrete regulating customary international law, we rather have alternative arguments in order to defend, to evidence, or to create customary international law. That's when I decided to put this slide with a football field, because I think this represents clearly what I have in mind after, of course, discussing the different theoretical possibilities. So, whereas I couldn't find a precise definition or concept or rule regulating customary international law, I did find, in fact, common arguments. Even the guys who argue black, like the complete objectivization of customary international law, and the guys who argue white and the complete subjectivization of customary international law, both of them, they share the same arguments. They were using the very same arguments. When I read through my part A of my research, I realized that even all contradictors, they were using this exact same set of arguments, sometimes to the left and sometimes to the right. And that's when I also made up a few categories or tensions, epistemological tensions, among the theory of customary international law. I will just only mention them. The first one was the existent tension between naturalism and positivism. Yeah? Then we have the tension between consensus and consent, deductivism and inductivism as methodologies of fighting out customary international law. And also, of course, and this is like a very well-known tension because it was posited by Castañeda, between utopia, this part of the theory who aims to defend apparent global pre-existent values, and apology, which is, of course, the defense of the state and sovereignty as the main principle regulating international law. And finally, I realized that those categories also were heading at different questions. One regarding the content of the rules, and others addressing issues of the nature of customary international law as a source. So, why the field? Why the football field? It's just to illustrate that my view of customary international law, after, of course, reviewing lots of literature on the field, and I am not afraid to say that even the most representative literature on this field, they share different ideas, but even those different ideas play within the very same argumentative framework. And that's when you find James playing football at the national team, and it's a representation of the epistemic community. I believe that the epistemic community, of course, formed by the actors who play in the game of international law, they play by these rules. I mean, even if you go left, you are the left striker, and you go to deductivism, or you go to the right, and you go to inductivism, you are still playing in the same field of customary international law, which brings me probably to my last slide, I guess. It should be the last one. Okay, let's move into the other one, where I think that customary international law is something which is made by the use of some argumentative alternatives put upon the disposition of the people practicing international law. But those, argumentative alternatives are not completely undetermined. They are determined because they play by those particular tensions. And this practice, or social practice, or however you want to call it, is what drowns. And here you have a painter, with a pen. It's like representing that this kind of practice is what drowns the football field, of customary international law as a source. And then this is where I come to this humble theory that customary international law is rather an argumentative framework made by the people practicing international law, in which, of course, there are a few possibilities. And even in those possibilities, which may seem contradictory, they actually play by the very same rules, and they can't go outside the field. They are always by the field. And that's how you explain why there is so many contradictory case law regarding customary international law. That's why, can you move to the previous slide? That's why you can find, not the other one, this fat guy just seated there in the coach watching TV and seeming surprised and saying, and in the continental shelf cases, the ICJ used mostly practice. Surprisingly, in the Nicaragua case, it used opinion juries only. How come, you know? And I think that these contradictions, this is only an example, they happen because a customary international law doesn't play by a particular rule, but it plays by an argumentative framework. It's made of a set of arguments, made, of course, by we international lawyers and people who work for states, for international organizations, international tribunals, and so on and so forth. So I hope, I mean, this is not very confusing. Still, this is, of course, I should say, a work in progress. This is just part of what I am currently doing in my PhD thesis, but I will appreciate my commentators and the moderator, their opinions, because I will certainly take note of all your recommendations. So thank you so much.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think this paper is a provocation, but of course I value provocation, and the candidate, of course, knows it. Let me just start by saying a few words to highlight how honored I am to be here today. It's a great pleasure. It's already my second visit, and I, of course, recognize a few faces in the room, and so I feel almost at home, I'm afraid, which means that I hope to be back. And of course, I'm very honored of the agreement that was signed this morning with my distinguished colleague Vanessa. I think we have already many ideas about how to give some content to this framework agreement. I'm also very happy to see that Fabian's ideas are growing. It's close to 10 years since I saw a shy Colombian student coming at the break to introduce himself. Colombian politeness. I was very moved by that, and it's nice to see Fabian growing self-confidence and even a bit sarcastic. Well, I need to make one caveat, just one. I usually always make 2 points. I'm going to make one caveat. Well, as Fabian mentioned, I'm the co-supervisor, so it means 2 things. It means that all the bad ideas in the paper are mine, and that all the good ideas are Fabian's. Well, it also means that as a co-supervisor, I don't want to have a supervision meeting in public. I mean, supervision meetings are always bloodbath, and I don't think they should be made in public. So my ambition is just to extract a few things from the paper which could be of interest for a wider audience. Well, as a supervisor, I can nonetheless highlight that this chapter is a very crucial piece in the entire project. This is where Fabian lays down its conceptual framework on which he will build his argument and his evaluative yardstick, which he will use for his examination of international environmental laws. It's a very, very crucial chapter. It's very, very important that he gets this right. As a supervisor, I can also maybe formulate a few words on the author, and of course, I'll comment on the author. Through these comments on the author, you'll find comments on the project itself, the project being the mirror of the author, or rather the author being the mirror of the project. And maybe the first thing I want to say about the author, about the project, is that Fabian is a superman. Not only he has read the hugely mushrooming, prolific literature on custom international law, there's millions of pages, and he seems to have read them all. So that's I think, he's a hero. He's also a hero because, and a Superman, because he wants to save the Amazon forest. I mean, that's the ultimate agenda behind this project. But he does not only want to save the Amazon forest, but he also wants to save customary international law. And so you're in a salvaging operation. You want to salvage the forests, the law, and everything that comes. And I wish I had time to prepare such provocative slides, and if I could find a slide of Superman flying over the Amazon forest, going to the Peace Palace in The Hague, I think that would be quite appropriate for today's session. Well, to be honest, I can see why you want to save the Amazon forest and the environment, and this is a concern I share, and which I value and appreciate, but I don't see why Fabián needs to save customary international law. I think the reason you want to save customary international law is because you are an expansionist. You want to expand international law. You want international to grow. You want international to regulate everything. And that's because you think, I mean, this is something we discussed with several people in the room this morning. It's just because you think that law is good, and that law is a good regulatory instrument that is going to save the world, which I think is something that can be challenged. Of course, you're very smart. We all know that. And because you're smart, you change your mind. And I'll come back to that later. But I think this piece is very interesting because it's like when you cut a tree, you see all the strides. I think this piece produces a little bit of a history of the fluctuations of your thoughts. I think there are parts which read as if you believe there was one single regime of customary international, and that was maybe the state of your thoughts 2 years ago, when we had a few fights here upstairs on the 5th floor. And then now the paper ends with something which is, I think, dramatically cynical, which is that customary international is just an argumentative framework. And so the paper is very interesting because it shows your itinerary, the itinerary of your thoughts over the last 2 years. And I think part of the challenge will be to polish this and to get rid of all the strides and to speak with one voice. Now, two very brief remarks on the paper itself. Well, the structure, I do think that you could do better work at having all this taxonomy of, you could do a better work at integrating the taxonomy of approaches and the taxonomy of tensions. I do think that the role of the tensions is to explain the heterogeneity you find in the scholarship. So, in that sense, I think Part B should have an explanatory function. Part B should more clearly explain the heterogeneity found in the scholarship. I think this is what you want to do, but you should say it more explicitly. Now, a comment on Part 2 and all these tensions. I mean, that's the slide with the football pitch. I wonder whether you're not actually, you say that we have this football field, which is multidimensional, but my impression, and I guess René is going to make a similar remark, my impression is that all these different tensions actually boil down to the same. Because you speak about natural versus positivism, deductivism versus inductivism, utopia versus apology, but natural law, deductivism, utopia, we are almost speaking about the same thing. Positivism, inductivism, apology, we are again in the same family. So I wonder whether the tensions you try to identify in Part 2 do not boil down to just the same thing, which is the old battle of traditional theories, positivism, naturalism, and so I do think that your football field is probably a bit more one-dimensional than you think. Now, just to finish, maybe my own view, I mean, you know it. I usually try to refrain from expressing my own views at the university because I think students should make up their mind by themselves. But I think the custom you're speaking about is not the modern custom. It is not the custom of Article 38. It is what I call the postmodern custom. It's a postmodern custom because the modern custom of Article 38 of the Statute of the Permanent Court of International Justice was born dead. The custom we find in Article 38 was never applied. It is a one-element custom. It's not the two-element theory that we know. I think all the courts, which as of the 1920s started to apply customary international law, didn't apply the customary international law found in Article 38. I think they applied something else. And this whole debate is about the postmodern custom and not the modern custom which was born dead. Now, of course, this postmodern custom is cherished by everyone, including by yourself, Fabián. for different reasons. It's a tool for the development of international law, it's malleable, everybody knows it doesn't work, but everybody likes it. And everybody likes to dance. And I think, Fabián, you're a dancer, a Latino dancer who cherishes customary international law. But actually, with a bit of hindsight, and I think that's a thought that develops as you read the paper, I think you're a Latino dancer in need of a catharsis. You present yourself as a superman, as a savior of customary international law, but actually you're a cynic. There is nothing more cynical than demoting customary international law to an argumentative framework. I myself still consider customary international law a source. You push it further. You say it's not even a source, it's an argumentative framework. I think you're destroying your golden calf. You're killing your idol. Maybe it will be time to kill me, but at least it's time to admit you're a cynic. I think you're a cynic, my dear Fabián. Well, be assured, it's painful, but you will feel much better afterwards.
Yes, thank you.
Buenas tardes, muchas gracias por la invitación y me pidieron el favor que hablar en inglés so we can have the conversation with all of us, so you might as well. What I think we could do is I'm going to make 3 points, or 3-4 points, and then from that I guess it would be interesting to start a conversation because this is the first time that I'm approaching the project, so it's interesting for me perhaps to have a pause and then talk to Fabián and then to realize what the whole project is about. So I'm going to make perhaps 3 or 4 comments and then a couple of questions regarding the project as a whole, not so much about the theory itself. So what the text wants to do is 2 things. So first, the text is a map. It's a map of the different readings of customary law. So customary law being a source of international law. And the idea, or Fabián's idea, is, look, this is the way that customary law has been read in theory. And then what I want to propose is 3 or 4 basic analytics through which I can make sense of these different rhetorical moves. So the text is at the same time pretty descriptive in the sense that it intends to make a description of theory, of the way in which theory is being read. But at the same time, it has a very strong normative agenda, even an ideological agenda, I would say. And the normative agenda is, and I think Jan put it well, is for the most part, customary law is a good thing. It's a good thing because, and you can read it in the text, because it does more or less 3 things. And this is the part where I think the project in its normative dimension is pretty ideological. Why? Why is it a good thing? Because, and the argument is very liberal, in the sense that because 1, it is somehow able to control power. Power being the actions of states. So states, bad, law, good, and custom, great, because custom regulates states somehow. And that, Fabián says, is a good thing. So, second thing. So the second reason why custom is good for Fabián, because it is dynamic. So, whereas you have treaties and international organizations, and they seem to be pretty old-fashioned, and they seem to be pretty tied to traditional mores, custom, at least in the version that Fabián is presenting, seems to be more dynamic, able to adapt. It seems to follow better the way in which international law regulates reality. And third, Fabián seems to think that custom is a good thing, so customary law is a good thing, because, for better or for worse, it somehow manages to involve big states, or powerful actors, and mainly states. Whereas treaties and more traditional sources seem to be more voluntaristic, so more based on consent and so on and so forth. Costume seems to tie them in a better way, or in history. So that's more or less the ideas. Fabián tries to make a description of theories first. Second, he makes a normative argument in the sense that this is a good thing. And third, this last part is my interpretation of his normative argument. That normative argument seems to have a very strong liberal inspiration, let's say. So, here comes my first point. Something that is missing in the discussion, and what's missing also in the presentation, is what is the role of costume as a source of international law? So, for better or for worse, you're focusing on a specific source, and you're saying, look, this source is different from others. You don't explain why, in that sense it will be different. And it does a different job. But what's that different job? So, why is it that costume as a source is something different from other sources, let's say? And why is this important to ask this? Because, and this is the second point, a lot of the arguments that you make could be made of all other sources of international law, let's say. You could make the argument that treaties can be read from a positivist and naturalist perspective, that they can be read from, or either way, or any of them, of the key tensions that you identify, the argument could be made of any source of international law, or as of international law as a whole. So, the question in that sense is, what is it, what's the specific added value of researching customary law as a source of international law, which is something that you intend to do, or that we can learn that is not present in other sources or on the theoretical discussion of international law as a whole? What is it that this source, specific source, teaches us about, I don't know, the architecture of the system, the politics of the international rule of law, so on and so forth? So that's one thing. So what's the role of costume, both in the international legal architecture and in your own project? Why costume? What can we learn from that? So that's the first thing. The second thing is, so the theory of costume has evolved widely, and the text seems too shallow in those terms. So it seems to take a picture of the way we understand costume today, and I think that connects a bit with Jan's idea of the costume that you take as being costume is really a version of costume that we're reading right now, which is a reaction to two prior waves of customary law. And then you could go further back to the discussion and you try to use Grotius in a sense, and we're going to talk a bit about that later. But, so the question is this, the evolution of costume, not only the source itself is supposed to be dynamic, but the doctrinal developments on costume are pretty dynamic as well. And this dynamism seems a bit lost in the text, in the sense that you put, in a way, in the same equal playing field, your Grotius, your Kelsen, so all these guys, you put them in the same level, and you say, look, this is one single cut of really costume. But there is differences, tensions, evolution between these different readings. Perhaps the text could be, I don't know, strengthened if you could work more on that. But it's not only the text, but this also goes, and the second point of how dynamic costume is, this also goes to the point of what is exactly your target? So what is it again? What is it exactly you're talking about when you talk about costume as a source of international law? So that's the second point. So more dynamism in the reading of theories, but also what exact target is it that you're looking at. The third point is about Senex. So Senex, you read Senex as those, and you include Jan there, which is surprising. I would never take it from Seneca. But then, but your reading of Senex is, look, all these people who think that costume is somehow a space where politics can be pushed, let's say, in a way. Regarding that approach, because they seem to be your nemesis. They seem to be the guys who are really negating the very basic aspect of your thesis, which is costume is something that should be more or less reconstructed or thought of as something that is inherently normative. And this is the point with the Senex. I don't understand very well if you mean by Senex those who argue that law is malleable, let's say, or those who deny the normative / legal aspect of international law, because you mix these two at the same time. So, for instance, think of Morgantown. Morgantown never denied that international law was law. He just said it's irrelevant. But it's a very subtle point, but it's very important in your argument, because you're mixing these two positions. So, for instance, standard creeds, so Clark's. His argument is not that costume is not law. His argument is that it is endlessly malleable because of the structure, and not only costume, but generally law is endlessly malleable. But that doesn't make it less law, it just makes it political. But the antinomy, the opposition between law and politics is false from this perspective. It's not that if you have law, you don't have politics, or if you have politics, you don't have law. You have both, but that doesn't make it less legal. That is what law is. That's the first perspective. The likes of Morgenthau, on the other hand, would say, no. There is something that is specifically legal, that you can identify as law. It just happens that in international relations, that's something that is epiphenomenological. Remember, that's the key dimension of Morgenthau. It's something that is not the key explainer of politics. So states don't. So that's something that is law. It's just something that. So it's really something, I don't know, like in a way, some kind of very old, non-usable law or regulation. You don't really deny that it's an actual legal source. You're just saying that no one cares about it. So that's the point of the Senex. If the target, so I'm wondering what kind of Senex are you thinking of? Because those two can be thought of Senex from your perspective. But it's very different to think because on the one hand, and that's something that's perhaps the reason why I don't really understand Jan being a Seneca. You have people like Jan who are not naive to think that costume is univocal and it's very clear, so on and so forth, but they still defend the idea of the legal form as legal as a form. You have other people who are going to tell you, no, the idea of the legal form as something that is inherently normative in itself, call it costume, treaties, whatever, is completely off target. Both would deny, or rather, both would say costume is politics. But it's very different to say that costume is politics because it has no legal normativity in itself, in terms of Frank, no normative pool. Or because it is an open-ended norm and then you can discuss about it and so on and so forth. So, and why is this important for the project, I think, and why did I spend so much time talking about this? Because depending on the line you follow, the project becomes a neo-positivistic project, let's say, or at least neo-formalist project, let's say. Why? Because If you say, no, costume does have an inherent normative pool, I just want to develop a way to make it, or I just want to create a map, so that form, that legal form that exists, is more sophisticated. Then, what your project is a postmodern formalist project. And that fits with the ideological aspect of you being a liberal, because then you would say, law is very important, and we have already heard the critics, and they already taught us that law is indeterminate, so on and so forth. But what I want to do, would say that version of Fabián, let's say, would say, what I want to do is I want to create a new version of the legal form that is sophisticated enough that it, on the one hand, takes into account the politics of the content while defending the value of the form. Let's say. That's one project. The other project, if you are thinking of the cynics in the other terms, would be to say, no. I don't think that there is an inherent value in law, and this could be almost Marxist in a way. You could say, no. The legal form is either non-legal, so it's just, for instance, superstructure, if you take a Marxist perspective. This is non-legal, or it is legal, but it is inherently non-normative. So, what I want to say is, my target, the second version of Fabián, would say, my target is, let's take down the building. Let's forget about the idea of sources. Let's take down the idea that there is something that is, so, and from this perspective, sources is just a map of power. And then, that's a different project. But, so, and I agree with them. So this is their route. And I'm using the opportunity because I'm not the supervisor, so I can just say stuff. And so from this route, you can just go one way or the other. It's a pretty ideological choice, but it's also depending on the materials you'll have, on your own feelings. So this very deep level of research gives you the space to go either way. But they're two very different projects, and I think the cornerstone is your idea of cynics. So one way to work on that would be to read your tensions to read the cynics through your tensions, and try to put them, perhaps even a chart. Where would cynics fit in the positivist naturalist distinction? And I think you would get very interesting results from there, and then you can make up your mind. And yeah, from that we can have some discussions.
I'm very honored to be here. I also want to thank Vanessa for the invitation, and I want to thank Fabián also for inviting me as a moderator. And I also want to thank the excellent and provocative comments of Professor Jan and Professor René. I just want to make a brief comment regarding some of the questions that you have made to Fabián, because I think we want to have a conversation regarding those issues, and that Fabián has also the possibility to answer some of the questions. So I'm going to make this brief comment, and then we can also hear 2 or 3 questions, and then Fabián can take the stand again. So I want to say that I found very interesting, both comments. One thing is, where do you want to go with the project? And I think that is the most important thing for you. But I also think that you don't have to rush. No? It seems to me like you are trying to get there, but you already don't know if you do want to save customary international law or not. And I think that's also valid. But that question is essential to your project. Like the question Jan said about, do you want to save, why is it that you want to save customary international law? If it seems to me that at the end you are saying that actually it's just argumentative. So at the end it's just a source of power, yes or not, but it stays a source of international law or not. So that's a very difficult question. But also the normative and political argument regarding what do you want to do, what do you want to save? Do you want to save the forest? Do you want to go there? But is it customary international law the way to do it? Or is it a tremendous difficult way to do it? Is that customary international law really the tool to save environmental law or not? And then I also want to make the comment regarding who has the power at the end to define what customary international law is. And then you are studying scholars, and of course scholars are very interesting in the theoretical positions, but at the end, courts are going to have the power to define customary international law. That's at least I want to know about your view about this. Is it, at the end, who has the power to define customary international law? And regarding that is going to save your argument about environmental law, about preventive norms of environmental law. Is going to change states' practice or not? And that connects with your final goal of defending this particular norm. So I didn't read the chapter, I read the paper, and I think there is also a relationship between customary international law and jus cogens norms, which you also use in your paper, and maybe it's hearing about a little bit more about that is going to be interesting because of the question also of René regarding what is the difference between different sources of international law, and maybe if using other sources of international law is not going to take you to the same result you are looking for. Or if you want to make this big theoretical discussion and get to change the view of international customary international law and change also the court's view on customary international law, and courts will have to do a very difficult argumentative work to do it. But today courts, for example, with only soft law norms, are creating soft law norms as jus cogens norms. So only with that you can get maybe to the same result you want, the political normative result you want. So those would be also like other questions regarding what you say, because I think I don't think I have to summarize what René and Professor Jan said, but maybe we can hear 2 or 3 questions from the audience, and then you can try to answer something. If you want to make your questions in Spanish, it's fine, and we can translate them.
I just want to make a very humble remark on the part A of the whole project that I think is it was contained in this paper that was delivered to us. In several parts of the paper, you mentioned that opinio juris is based on a belief. My question is the following: can we claim a rationality? It is rational. Can we claim that the system is rational or keep up with a Cartesian ambition if we base custom, one of the primary sources of the international law, as founded in a somehow irrational movement? That's my first question. Second question is, if custom law is based on a belief, and bringing back the belief realm, and not in a certainty, can we say that it is a mistake, what we say in Spanish, error de derecho, as a source of law, that this intellectual operation of thinking that somehow a norm is there, but it's not there, but at the same time we create all the architecture of customary law on the basis of that foundation. And that comes back to the first question: what is rationality there? From the rest of the article, I have no following remarks. I just say that I found it very interesting, and as I told you before, I really enjoyed reading it. Thank you.
so much. This is rather a very difficult position, to be here at the stand after those, this bulk of comments and everything. Although, I really appreciate all the comments and the contradictions, and because when you are criticized, of course, you have like a banner telling you, okay, you have to strengthen this. So I really appreciate this. I don't know where to start. Okay, let's say that there is a common remark, and which is, what is the aim of my research? Yeah. So I just want to tell you what the process was. As I told you, at some point of my academic life, before I was writing in international environmental law, and I just found out that even though there was a rising number of international treaties, written international law, like the very foundations of international environmental law were claimed to be based on customary international law, the very foundations. I mean, the main principles, the main institutions, and everything, and even the most representative cases on international environmental law have been developed through this particular source. So this is when I realized, without having like a particular interest, I just realized, like, come on, this is quite a deal in international environmental law, because treaty law, at least, and I am not saying that this is like the final thought, but at least you have the Vienna Convention on the Law of the Treaties, which pretends to regulate the function of treaty law. But there's not much regarding customary international law, and if you go through several treatises and textbooks of international environmental law, you will see that all the authors are usually just claiming that this or that is customary international law. And even though the argument is most of the time is not convincing at all, that's how the field has been developed. And nowadays, you have courses of international environmental law, you have lots of textbooks, you have LLMs and people doing PhD researches on this particular field. So for bad or for worse, the field just developed. But when you look at it, it has been mainly developed to this source. So this is when I wonder, like, come on, this is quite a deal, but there is no certainty regarding the rules they are using in order to argue that something is or is not customary international law. So at the very beginning, I didn't actually want to save or not to save the Amazons. My initial purpose was kind of selfish, just theoretical. I wanted to have the ideas clear, to clear the things out. At the very beginning, I didn't even know whether I was gonna reach a position which may work for environmentalists or probably to the other side. I didn't know who was gonna hire me in the future. I just wanted to do this for the sake of clarity. I wanted to know how this thing worked. That was it. I have to be completely honest with you. And then, that's when I started researching on customary international law, also without having at the beginning a particular ideological agenda, but just to describe what the practice of the scholarship, the international scholarship, was on this particular field. So at the beginning, I just to put the things in other words, I didn't aim to propose lex ferenda, but to describe what the people were saying. But I found out that what the people were saying was just completely contradictory. And even though the field was still being developed day by day. I mean, if you can see a field like 2 years ago and now, you can see that it's growing, like a teenager all the time. But you don't know why is this field growing. And even though most of the foundations still claim to be in customary international law, but nobody used to say it loud what they meant by customary international law. So that's when I was like, come on, I have to do a research and to contribute on this particular field without going outside the international scholarship. still within, certain dogmas. Like for instance, that customary international law is still a source of law. I wouldn't, of course, from this particular perspective, my research is still orthodox, because I don't aim to go outside of the box, and say, oh, this is rubbish. But I just wanted to play within the field, and by using their same very arguments, by using their very same words, by using their very same arguments, but trying to make a reading of what they have been doing and trying to show them. And when I meet them, it's just the community writing about customary international law, including judges. Because I mentioned case law, of course, among the text. So that was my initial idea, So of course I was orthodox. I started the research with the assumption that customary international law is a source of law, because that's what all the textbooks and most of the traditional products on international law say so. So I was starting from this. Of course, from this presumption, I didn't want to go outside from it. But when I went there, in part A, I was initially just trying to show the reader or the addressee of my research that I have been putting together the different theoretical attempts to theorize customary international law. And here I come to one of your comments. There are trends who have claimed that customary international law has changed along with history. So, for instance, there is this famous, although we are not completely sure, well done, but famous paper from Anthea Roberts, which is called From Traditional to Modern Perspectives. And there is another important paper by Fiedler, which basically claims the same. So, there are scholars who argue that customary international law changes in accordance with the change of history. But from my perspective, what I saw was that this is not like an obligation, this is not like a certainty or just an objective truth. It was also a version to see customary international law. Even those who were trying to demonstrate that customary international law was evolving historically, they were also biased by their own theoretical choice. And that's why, of course, I included them, of course, and I'm fully aware that this is a perspective, but I assume that they were also attempts to theorize customary international law in that manner. But then I saw it also as one of the possibilities to theorize about customary international law. Now, here there is another of your important remarks, and we have been discussing about this before, of course, and you have asked me, what do you want with this? And I have to be honest, at the beginning I didn't have like a particular purpose of either expanding or destroying customary international law. But after doing my research, I guess that I rather try to contribute to the rescuing of customary international law. Why? Why is that? Because after doing this initial research, which I did in part A, even though I found out that there were possibilities, I just didn't stop there. I just didn't say, yeah, customary international law doesn't exist, this is rubbish, it is not a source, it doesn't work, come on, see you later. No. But I also collected the common elements of the different contradictory theories, and that's when I realized that there were common grounds. And even though, like for some, probably for you, the idea of having rather an argumentative framework could be seen as something pessimistic, I rather think the opposite. Because there is lots of literature, discrediting customary international law. Why? Because of the lack of description. Because all the versions, they claim to be the right version of the theory of customary international law. And those articles are well quoted among the international legal literature. And I guess like this is a known thing, like it is known the situation, you know, of the understanding of customary international law. So what I wanted to do is rather a more transparent thing, you know, and say, okay, let's accept that there are versions, but let's also recognize that there is still a framework. And I personally think that it is not that bad to have an argumentative framework when this concept of argumentative framework is even more stronger than the versions who argue that there is a rule, but still everyone knows that this is a very weak rule. So, of course, if you ask me, I think I will end up defending, of course, customary international law as a source. And why not? I will be also contributing to those who work for the sake of the environment. Why? And of course, this is not said here because I hope I will say it in a different chapter, because despite of the growing nature of international environmental treaties, the foundations, you know, the main principles that govern international environmental law are claimed to be emerged through customary international law. But at the current state of the understanding of current international law, this foundation seems very weak because it's contradictory. So then I will offer a different reading, which of course purports that there is a set of arguments that can be used, and that those arguments have been used by the development of international environmental law. So this is basically how I see it. I have so many notes, but I don't know whether I should go further into something.
Can I push you? What does that mean? What does that even mean to defend customary law as a source? So I understand that you want to defend the contents of certain customs in the terms that you want, because they reflect your view of a good world, let's say. That's one thing. But what does that, so what does that mean to defend? So that's the part that I'm having some trouble understanding. What is it exactly? Now, in the sense, so I guess our questions weren't so much directed towards what is it that you want to do personally, but rather what's the intervention, the scholarly intervention that the piece would make, in the sense that, for instance, reconstructing customary law as a source. What does that mean? In the sense that, what's the contribution there? What is it? In what terms are you thinking about that?
Okay, thank you. Then this is very important, because then I could add, of course, what would be the usefulness of a research like this. So I must say that I am actually playing by the rules, René. You know, I am not going outside the box. I am just playing by the orthodox understanding of international law, which is regulated by the sources. That's my starting point. So I think that a research like this will help like practitioners to understand and to argue, to better argue the existence of particular customary international rules. You know, I am actually very interested in if you ask me, in the work of the International Law Commission nowadays. They a few years ago they appointed a special work doctor on the evidence and formation of customary international law, which is Sir Michael Wood, and that's what they're doing. I mean, I think at the International Law Commission, they have been developing a project, a long-term project on the evidence and formation of customary international law, because it is still considered an important source of international law, like a foundation of international law, which is the very essence of our field of study. But they started the whole project because they realized and they are aware of this particular situation, that there is not certainty regarding the theory of customary international law, that everybody was just quoting and using the wording of Article 30A of the ICJ statute without actually knowing it. And I totally agree with you, because the text is there, but if you, of course, if you confront the text with the actual practice, this text has never been used as such. So there is an interest in international law to provide just practical tools to arbitrators, to judges of the ICJs, whenever they are deciding a case. So if you're an ICJ judge and you are deciding something, whatever it is the field, and you will have to assess at some point whether some particular rule is or is not customary international law. But when you look at your tools, you just don't have tools. I mean, the tools are just a big amount of possibilities, which they all seem contradictory. So courts end up just taking one of the tools they find. Sometimes they have a hammer, sometimes they have a screwdriver, and they say, ah, what hell, let's take this one. And they use it. And they use it. So I was assuming that if I were a judge, I wouldn't have much tools to actually decide. And I would be doing what they do, which is just to argue that, yeah, blah, 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 this rule is customary international law, but they never explain how they reach to that particular conclusion. So that was my principal aim, and this is very important in the field of international environmental law. You know, there have been a few cases in the field of environment before the ICJ, but there has not been much development. I think also because I mean, they always want to avoid deciding on environmental cases because that's the reality, that's the tools they have. So, to summarize,
Can you a little bit on that final point you were arguing that? So, it's going to be a tool for environmental practitioners through litigation. It's your point. Like, through litigation and then through jurisprudence of the courts, and then you are going to be able to apply those customary international law rules to environmental law. Is it because what you're trying to do is like help like the environmental law as such is like a very it's not only very limited tool, but only it's very dangerous because you are what you're trying to say, if I understand, is that only those rules that can be proved to be customary international law rules are going to be mandatory for states and for also for enterprises or you know. So it can be dangerous, your argument, because you're saying that only customary international law rules are going to be obligatory. And if you use other sources of international law, and if you try to manage, if you try to deal with soft law rules in environmental law, and you put them like in another state of regarding the argument of sources, and then the difference between the different sources is very, very, very important in this particular argument. Then you will have to deal with that dilemma, you know, because you are. That was what I was saying before. You're putting all the power in courts, and then courts are the ones. Courts and arbitrators. Those are the ones that are going to be saying what states have to do through a very difficult tool, which is clearly, theoretically, very confusing, which is international customary law. So just to push, I don't see how can that be a real tool for environmental law practitioners. It's difficult for me to understand.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad the whole debate has raised so much, you know, contradictions. You know, I am flattered. So I should specify which is the connection between my reflection on customary international law and international environmental law, because it is this way. Of course, I fully understand that this kind of questions may arise because this is only one chapter of a whole project, but I could say that the main objective of my research is to look at customary international law as a source from within, trying to describe, you know, what it is, and pretending not to have like an initial bias, but trying to describe what it is. The relation of this particular object, which is essentially customary international law as a source, with environmental law, is that I only aim to use, you know, very utilitarian, to use international environmental law as a case to demonstrate or to prove or to check or to test what I have been doing previously in the theoretically arena, you know, because I wish I can have like a larger agenda in the future. We were discussing this with my supervisor before. I wish I can do the same with investment law and with international criminal law and with so other fields of international law. But we decided that this also would be, of course, very unrealistic to have this kind of huge project in just one research thesis. So I should specify that the main objective of my thesis is customary international law. I'm reading how to either create or identify that you have a customary rule, and then I will use international environmental law as the first case, I hope, in my whole academic career to check and to test this particular theory. I hope in a postdoc I will do exactly the same, but trying to go with other fields, with economic law and investment law, OEMC, who knows? But this is something I just chose as a start. And in any case, I just think this might be helpful not only for judges, but for whoever is working in the field of international law and is arguing the existence of a particular customary international rule. Because that was my initial concern. It was, I have to accept, it's very simplistic, very, and I am saying it so, it's very simplistic, is that beforehand, when for instance, if you just Google customary international law in the case law of the ICJ, you hardly find an argument demonstrating why the particular judge came to that conclusion. If you Google customary international law in the website of the UN, just let's say soft law or whatever, you hardly find an argumentation of how they reached this conclusion. If you just look at memorials or even speeches from heads of states before the UN, sometimes arguing that this is human right or that is customary international law, you hardly see an argumentation why the person, which is usually acting on behalf of any international law actor, came or reached that particular conclusion. So actually the provisional title of my thesis is not like customary international law, the real theory. It's just contribution to the understanding of the function of customary international law as a source. I have a final remark regarding one of your comments, and that's my understanding of cynicism. And I try to make it clear because I am fully aware that there are several versions of cynicism. So I'm just going to read the first 3 lines of this part. This is start. Professor D'Apremont, here, himself interestingly suggested me to include into the present research what he refers as the cynic's definition. Surely, and this is of course of my own product, not making reference to Greek cynicism of a simple life detached from worldly pleasures, but implying its smaller meaning of being inclined to consider customary international law purely motivated by one's personal agendas. And then, of course, I elaborate the idea. But of course, I am aware of your commentaries, and I certainly will have to specify this more. But in order to answer your question, my cynicism is from within. I don't pretend, as I have previously said, to go out of the box of the legal order. I'm actually rather a very orthodox person. I am just playing by the rules within, the traditional understanding of the foundation of international law. And I do believe that customary international law is still being one of the main sources of public international law. And there are hundreds or thousands of cases being argued right now, as we speak, based on customary international law. So I am very playing by the rules. So my version of cynicism is the one that believes that even this source, legal source, could be pushed by political agendas. And actually, The authors I try to quote in this particular part of my document are international lawyers who practice international law and who usually are thinking within the field of international law. So I am definitely one of this kind of, I am trying to describe this particular cynicism. So the cynicism that comes from within, because you certainly pointed out that there might be at least two versions, probably more, but those are like the more evident. So my version, which I should definitely express out more evidently, is that they are still rules, they are still sources. I am still, playing with the system, but that some may believe that those rules can be pushed by political agendas. So I'm not just getting out of the box. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. I'm standing with distinguished professors of international law who have been arguing before the ICJ and practice law, the very president of the Colombian Academy of International Law. I would rather be in another place. But yeah, thank you so much. There are so many comments, all of them very rich, very important, but I mean, you have to see my iPad. It's lots of comments. I don't, unless the moderator allows us, but I don't think she will do it.
We don't have enough time because we have to go to, unless someone have a closing remark or something. So no, we want to thank you all for being here, and thank you again, thank you Vanessa again for inviting us, and thank you Fabián, Professor Jan, and Professor René. Then we're going to have a space for a conversation and coffee outside, and thank you again very much. In the name of the Colombian Academy of International Law, Universidad de los Andes, Universidad Javeriana, and Universidad de Manchester. Thank you.